So in chapter 16, we see a very short excerpt from Naya's point of view. And it says on page 97 that after the excitement of seeing that first spray of water, the villagers went back to work. Remember, they saw the spray come up, but it was very muddy. So, several men gathered in front of Naya's house. They had tools with them, hoes and spades and scythes. Her father went out to meet them. The men walked together to a spot beyond the second big tree and began clearing the land. Naya watched them for a few moments. Her father saw her and waved. She put the plastic can down and ran over to him. Papa, what are you doing? Clearing the land here, getting ready to build. To build what? Naya's father smiled. Can't you guess? And I don't know that she can. She has no clue what's happening. I think she sees that they're like, okay, they're trying to find some water, but everything's been muddy up to now. And so, but because her father seems very casual in speaking to her, and he smiles at her, and it seems like he is positive in what they're looking for, what they're looking to build, and that it will be successful. So, do you know what it is, Sean? So, chapter 16 picks up with Salva, still in Rochester, New York, a month after his arrival there. And remember, when he got there, he was given clothes and more clothes than he's ever had on in his life. And he gets his first feel for the cold, and he's embracing a new life. So, the start of chapter 16 puts us with Salva there, and he's been there for a month. And he's had to deal with a lot of different changes, one being the cold. Another thing that he finds to be of interest are the paved roads. There's not a lot of dirt roads, even though his new father tells him they do have dirt roads up there. It's just different from what he would have had back home. And he also, you have like the buildings that are around, and you have the cars. And so Salva's having to adjust to a lot of new things. And he finds comfort in spending time in his studies. And it says on page 98 that the first several weeks of Salva's new life were so bewildering that he was grateful for his studies. His lessons, especially English, gave him something to concentrate on, a way to block out the confusion for an hour or two at a time. So he kind of needs these mental breaks from everything that's different, because Rochester, New York looks nothing like his home in southern Sudan, or even what he would have known in Ethiopia or Kenya at those refugee camps. And so it's very different. Snow on the ground, it's cold, and even though his new mom tells him, in about 3 months the snow will melt and go away, it's just all so much for him to um, deal with all at once. So, but the family is there and they're helping him. They're answering his questions and, trying to work with him and help him as much as they can. And it says on the bottom of page 98 that it had taken 4 days for Salva to travel from the Ifo refugee camp to his new home in New York. And what I think about that is, remember how long it took him to go from the time he was 11 when he first ran into the bush and he was trying to get to the refugee camp. That took so long. And yet he went an even greater distance going from Kenya to New York in the United States. And he had to go across oceans for that. And yet it only took him 4 days. But the amount of time that he spent walking to get to those refugee camps, and then when he changed to refugee camps as well, just so much time that he spent traveling. And then to get to another country and then United States for a new home took him 4 days. So it says there were times when he could hardly believe that he was still on the same planet. And it's again just because everything looked totally different. Nothing reminded him of home. So the top of page 99 says, now that Salva was learning more than a few simple words, he found the English language quite confusing. And he finds something that I would think is very common to people learning the English language, the sound, the OUGH letters, because in the word rough, O-U-G-H, sounds like uff. And in though, O-U-G-H sounds like O. Fought, O-U-G-H sounds like aw. And through, O-U-G-H sounds like ooh. And then you have bow as well, which sounds a little bit like though. So the same letters are there in these words, but they all are pronounced different ways. And so this is confusing to people who are learning the English language. He says, or how a word had to be changed depending on the sentence, and they use the word chickens. So if he says, when you meant the living birds that walked and squawked and laid eggs, you would say chickens. There are chickens in the yard. But if you're talking about what's there on your plate to be eaten, he says, we're having chicken for dinner. That was correct, even if you had cooked 100 chickens. So we don't say, would you like chickens for dinner? We say, do you want chicken for dinner? And that's one or many. And so this is just some of the things that confused him when he was learning the English language. Sometimes he wondered if he would ever be able to speak and read English well, but slowly, with hours of hard work over the months and years, his English improved. Remembering Michael, remember this is the refugee worker who was originally teaching him English and then also taught him volleyball. Salva also joined a volleyball team, and I liked how at the end he finds something that's now familiar to him because it says it was fun playing volleyball just as it had been at the camp. Setting and spiking the ball were the same in any language. So he found that commonality with what his life was like in Rochester to what his life was like back home, or in the refugee camps anyway. The bottom of page 99, we now have a time span of 6 years later. So Salva should, have a very good grasp of his life there in Rochester. His grasp on the English language would be much stronger, and he's been there with his family for 6 years. He's going to college, and he's decided to study business. And at the bottom of page 99, it says he had a vague idea that he would like to return to Sudan someday to help the people who live there. And so here's this idea that's just kind of slowly growing in his mind, but I don't know that he knows what he can do to help those people yet. But he wants to return to help them. And it says at the top of page 100 that sometimes that seemed like an impossible notion. In his homeland, there was so much war and destruction, poverty, disease, and starvation, so many problems that had not been solved by governments or rich people or big aid organizations. What could he possibly do to help? Salva thought about this question a lot, but no answer came to him. But then it says one evening at the end of a long day of study, Salva sat down at the family computer and he sees that he has an email. And when he opens this email, he sees it's from a cousin that he doesn't really know, but it's somebody from his family. And the cousin was working for a relief agency in Zimbabwe, it says there in the middle of page 100. So Salva opens up the message. And it says that, he's reading the message, but he really didn't understand at first what it was saying. So he's reading this message and he's only catching a few words. United Nations Clinic, your father, stomach surgery. And so he kind of latches on to the idea or the words that say your father. And remember, he doesn't know if his parents or anyone in his family is even alive. So here he's seeing these words, and it says he read the words again and again, and then he jumps up and he goes and he finds Chris and Louise, his American parents, and he says they found my father, and so he starts to make plans to return to southern Sudan because he's got to get to the clinic and find where his father is, and before his father leaves the clinic, because if his father leaves the clinic, he might lose him again, and he wouldn't know where to look for him. So at the top, towards the top of page 101, it says that Salva immediately began planning to travel to Sudan, but with the war still raging, it's still going on, and this is many years later, it was very difficult to make the arrangements. He had to get permits fill out dozens of forms, and organize plane flights and car transport in a region where there were no airports or roads. And as he's doing this, it's taking a lot of time. It took not days or weeks, but months before all the plans were in place. And there was no way to get a message to that hospital. So it tells us towards the bottom of page 101 what he was thinking. What if my father leaves the hospital without telling one where he is going? What if I get there too late? I will never be able to find him again. So again, we see some of his doubt. But again, remember what the theme of our story is. What is the theme? Well, we have don't give up, right? Don't ever give up. Always keep looking for the positive. Always keep trying no matter what. Don't give up. And so once he gets everything filled out and everything's ready to go, he is able to fly. It says he flew in a jet to New York City, another one to Amsterdam, and a third to Kampala in Uganda. In Kampala, it took him 2 days to get through customs and immigration before he could board a smaller plane to go to Juba, which is in southern Sudan. And as he's going, he's seeing home all over again. And it says how familiar everything was, and yet how different. The unpaved roads, the scrubby bushes and trees, the huts roofed with sticks bound together. Everything was just as Salva remembered it, as if he had only left yesterday. At the same time, the memories of his life in Sudan were very distant. How could memories feel so close and so far away at the same time? And so he's struggling with this because here he sees things and it's like he never even left. So he gets to the hospital where he had heard his father was, and he says, "Hello, I am looking for a patient named Mawian Dut Arik." And I don't know if I said that right, but he's looking for his father. That would be his father's name. Chapter 17 with Naya. She is still standing there talking with her father, and he's asking her, remember, with a smile on his face, what do you think we are building here? And she still just doesn't know. So she starts to take a guess at what is being built. And she guesses a house or a barn. And her father shakes his head no. And he says it's something even better. And he tells her it's a school. Now, the schools that are there in the area are a half a day's walk from their home, is what the book says on page 103. But remember, Naya spends her mornings going back and forth to the watering spot twice a day, 2 times before lunch anyway. And so there's no time for school. And especially for the girls, because the girls have to help around the house and help with the other children. But so here it says at the top of page 103, the nearest school was half a day's walk from their home. And Naya knew this because Depp had wanted to go there. Her brother had wanted to go there. But it was just too far, so he was not able to go. And so her father confirms that, yes, it's a school. And he tells her that with a well there in the village, no one has to go to the pond anymore, so the children will all be able to go to school. They're going to have time to go to school because they no longer have to go and walk to the watering hole. So it says that Naya stared at her father. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She is speechless. And then when at last she was able to speak, it was only a whisper. All the children, Papa? The girls too? And so there's a little bit of doubt for her, but Papa confirms that yes, Naya, girls too. And now go and fetch water for us. And he returned to work scything the long grass. And so Naya's going to get a chance to go to school. So she went back and picked up the plastic can. She felt as if she were flying. School. She would learn to read and write. So not only is Naya's life going to improve because they're going to have fresh water there, clean water in their village, she's also getting a school that she can go to so she can learn. And she is so excited about this. So, Sean, we come to chapter 17 of Salva's story, and he has gotten to Sudan, and he's found the hospital where he heard his father was, and he's in a room, and it said that he stood at the foot of one of the beds in the crowded clinic, and he says hello to a patient in the bed, and the patient responds back, and he tells the patient that he has come to visit him. And the patient says, "To visit me? But who are you?" And Salva says, "You are Mawian Dut Arik, aren't you?" And the man says, "Yes, that is my name." And Salva, it says, smiled, his insides trembling. Even though his father looked older now, Salva had recognized him right away. But it was as if his eyes needed help from his ears. He needed to hear his father's words to believe he was real. He didn't think his eyes were being honest with him, and so he wanted to hear his father speak. And he tells him that he is his son, Salva. And his father shares that, he's not really sure that is Salva. They thought Salva had died. And he says, "It is not possible." But Salva says, "Yes, it's me, Father." And so it says at the top of page 105 that Maui and Dut reached out and touched the arm of this tall stranger beside him. "Salva," he whispered, "can it really be you?" And Salva just waits. And his dad is looking at him, and then he realizes it really is Salva. And it says, his body shaking with sobs of joy, he reached up to hug Salva tightly. So here you have this wonderful reunion of the father and son. And in the next paragraph, it tells us that it had been almost 19 years since they had last seen each other. Remember, Salva was only 11 when he had to run into the bush for safety from the fighting. So 19 years later, he finds his father, and his father sees him for the first time. And so he wants to bless his son and rejoice in his coming back. So he sprinkles water on his son's head. And it says that this is the Dinka way of blessing someone who is lost and is found again, to sprinkle some water on the head. And his father tells him that everyone was sure that he was dead. And it says that the village wanted to kill a cow for you. And this was a ritual of sorts of something that they would do to mourn the death of a loved one. They would kill a cow. But his father said he would not let them kill a cow because he did not want to believe that Salva was gone, and that he wanted to believe that he was alive somewhere. He had hope. And so Salva says, what about his mom? He wants to know if his mom's okay. And his father, and I think it says, Salva asks, barely daring to hope, at the end of page 105. And I think he's really hopeful that she is still alive, but maybe that's too much to ask because he's found his father and his father's alive. Maybe it's too much to ask that his mother be alive as well. But his father smiles at him and he says she's back at the village. So not only has Salva found his father, he also learns that his mother is still alive. And so it says at the top of page 106 that Salva wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. And he says, "I must see her." But his father tells him that there's still war going on and that if he comes back, both sides of the war are going to try to make Salva fight for them, and he could end up dying. And so Salva has to promise that he's not going to try to return to his home until it is safe for him to do so. And towards the top of page 106, it says his father told Salva that his sisters were with his mother, so he still has his sisters. But of his three brothers, only Ring had survived the war. Eric, the oldest, and Kuul, the youngest, were both dead. And so he thinks about these brothers, and he is trying to remember them. And then it says he learned more about his father's illness. Years of drinking contaminated water, that muddy water, had left Maui and Dut's entire digestive system riddled with guinea worms. Sick and weak, he had walked almost 300 miles to come to this clinic and was barely alive by the time he finally arrived. So this water is still an issue and something that Salva is very much aware of. It says that Salva and his father had several days together, so they were able to, remember people and talk about things and catch up on 19 years. 19 years, that's so long. It's almost as long as you've been alive, Sean, and so that's a long time. Not that you're old. I'm not saying you're old. But all too soon, it was time for Salva to return to America. So he now has to go back to his new home. And he says that he will come to the village as soon as it's safe. And his father tells him, "We will be waiting there for you." And so he has this promise from his dad that his dad will be there waiting, his mom will be there waiting, and the rest of his family will be there waiting for Salva to return when it's safe. And Salva promises to return. And so on the plane back, he's, remembering this conversation with his dad and just the touch of having his dad touch his face and his brow and sprinkling the water on his head. And that gave him an idea. And it says on towards the bottom of page 107, it says an idea came to him, an idea of what he might be able to do to help the people of Sudan. But could he do it? It would take so much work. Perhaps it would be too difficult. But how would he know unless he tried? And if we go back to that theme, Sean, the theme of just don't give up, don't give up, we have Salva, who is a very determined young man and an adult at this time, who has an idea. And so far in life, he's never given up on anything, even when he wanted to give up. So he goes back to Rochester and he begins to talk to people that he knows there, and he begins to get some help on some ideas of what he can do to make his plan work. And he ends up going and meeting with groups of people. And he's very nervous about this at first because he's afraid that he's going to mess up speaking in the English language and maybe not pronounce his words properly. And so he's very concerned, and he kind of has a little bit of a scary time when he first started speaking to this one group, because as he started to speak, the microphones made a screechy noise. And so, it kind of scared him a little bit. But then he remembered that this is not the first time he's talked in front of a large group of people. And he thinks back about the time that he led some of those boys, the lost boys, to the refugee camp. And at the top of page 109, the second paragraph says, years before, when he was leading those boys on their walk from the Ethiopian refugee camp to the one in Kenya, he had called a meeting every morning and evening. The boys would line up facing him, and he would talk to them about their plans, all those eyes looking at him, but every face interested in what he had to say. It was the same here. The audience had come to the school cafeteria because they wanted to hear him. Thinking of that made him feel a little better, and he spoke into the mic again. And so he goes on, and then it tells us that a year passed, then 2 years, then 3, and he's still going and speaking to people, and he's still trying to get help for his plan. It says he spoke to hundreds of people in churches, at civic organizations, and in schools. Would he ever be able to turn his idea into reality? Whenever he found himself losing hope, Salva would take a deep breath and think of his uncle's words. And remember, his uncle gave him some words when they were trying to get to Ethiopia, to that refugee camp. And it's just a step at a time, one problem at a time. Just figure out this one problem. Day by day, solving one problem at a time, Salva moved toward his goal. And so again, his uncle, who was such an inspiration to him and a hope for him as he was traveling in Ethiopia and wanted to give up so many times, and his uncle showed him how to take each step and each day and each problem. Just do it one at a time. Take little small steps, and then you'll see, as you look back, all the way you went. But he does this for this plan. And so here his uncle is still, in a way, very much alive, because Salva is remembering him and using strategy that he gave him to help this plan come to a fulfillment. And so we'll talk a little bit next week about what that plan is as we finish up the book. We're almost done with this book, and I really hope you've enjoyed it, Sean. And so, as we finish up the book, we'll talk about it. And your dad mentioned having a quiz to kind of see what you recall. So, we'll do that as well next week, okay? And so, I'll give you a call in the next few days, or you can call me when you finish this audio and we'll talk about it. All right? See you later.